The Trump administration is planning to expand the policy known as Remain in Mexico. CBS News reports the plan is facing several legal and logistical hurdles. As of this week, almost 12,000 Central American asylum seekers have been returned to Mexico while their cases are processed, according to a Mexican government official. CBSNews.com politics reporter Camilo Montoya-Galvez has been following the story, and he joins us now from Washington. So, Camilo, remind us again what this policy is.
So thanks for having me, Vlad. So the policy known as Remain in Mexico, officially called by the administration the Migrant Protection Protocols, requires asylum seekers who claim asylums at ports of entries at the U.S.-Mexico border to return to Mexico while they wait for their court hearing in the U.S. So they wait months, even up to a year, before they re-enter the U.S. So a judge can hear their asylum case.
So, Camilo, help our audience understand, what does the administration hope to accomplish through the expansion of this?
So, Vlad, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said it pretty explicitly last week. He said he hopes the expansion of the policy will make a quote-unquote fundamental difference in the calculus of migrants from Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras who are considering making the dangerous journey north. And so they hope that migrants will take into account that once they go to the border and claim asylum, they will be returned to Mexico, where they will have to wait months before they get a hearing in which they will possibly be denied asylum. So the purpose, according to attorneys and Democrats, and really what the secretary suggested, is one of deterrence.
So, look, a lot of Americans are going to say, well, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with staying in Mexico or another country while you apply for asylum and you wait for your asylum case to be heard?
Right. That's a great question. Well, remember, so in the ports of entries that have implemented this policy until now, El Paso, San Diego, and Calexico, 2 in California, 1 in Texas, they border Mexican cities like Ciudad Juarez, Tijuana, which are some of the most violent cities in terms of homicide rates in the world, in the Western Hemisphere. And so these migrants are returning to places that they're in a foreign country, right? Sometimes they don't have most of them are very poor. They don't have any connections there. Some of them are vulnerable populations like pregnant women, families with children, LGBTQ individuals, and they're in a foreign land with very little access to legal aid, trying to navigate this very complicated system of asylum, and they're waiting months. And although the Mexican government made a kind of a vague promise to offer them work permits, this hasn't happened, according to attorneys, yet.
All right, so there are certainly some people who are going to say, look, I'm okay with that. I'm okay with folks that are seeking asylum to perhaps wait in another country while their case is heard in the United States. But then in your article, you mentioned that the Remain in Mexico policy is already being challenged by U.S. courts, by immigrant rights groups and asylum seekers. So explain what some of the concerns that they're raising are.
Right, so the chief argument for these groups that have mounted this legal challenge to the policy is that the administration is violating a standard in international law that says you cannot return asylum seekers and refugees to countries where they may face persecution. And of course, they're referring to Mexico. And so they're saying that this administration is denying these asylum seekers due process and also placing them in situations where they face great risk.
So what have you learned about the state of some of those cases right now?
Yeah, so one attorney told me that some of these asylum seekers, which now number nearly 12,000, which is a lot of people who have been returned to Mexico, some of them are getting their first court hearing scheduled for June 2020, which is obviously a very long time to spend in a foreign country like Mexico, where, like I said, has little legal help, shelter, housing, employment for them. So it's a long time, and these cases, if the administration expands this policy as they're proposing, they're going to increase dramatically.
So as you know, Camilo, this is all coming in the wake of the Trump administration demanding that Mexico do more to stop migrants from ever making it to the United States. It was why the president was threatening tariffs on Mexico. You mentioned some of the challenges facing those asylum seekers in Mexico, but what are Mexican authorities, the Mexican government, doing to at least make the process a little easier for people who might get stuck in this remain in Mexico policy?
Right. So under the agreement that Mexico and the U.S. made late last week was that they made a very extraordinary commitment to not only providing work permits, which, like I mentioned before, has not happened yet, but they will also provide migrants health care, education, and shelters, which, like I said, some Democrats and attorneys that I spoke to said they're very skeptical about because that hasn't happened yet. And if they're going to do this on a larger scale, well, it's going to be, they want to see it before believing it at this point, Vlad.
All right, Camilo, your article on CBSNews.com is called Trump's Plan to Deter Migrants with Remain in Mexico Faces Logistical and Legal Hurdles. I urge our viewers to check it out. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Vlad. I appreciate it.